Two men are standing in a street in Jerusalem. Everyone in the city knows their names. Soldiers have tried to kill them. Armies have tried to kill them. And every single time, something stops them. Fire. Just fire. Out of nowhere. Then one day the fire stops coming. The men fall. And for the first time in 3.5 years, the whole world gets exactly what it wanted. Cameras turn on. The bodies stay right there, in the street, for everyone to see. But this story isn't over. Not even close. Before we get to those two men, you need to understand the city they're standing in. Because this isn't some peaceful backdrop. This is Jerusalem. And by the time these two men show up, it's a war zone. Here's what happens first. A man named John gets handed a measuring rod, and he's told to measure something specific. The temple, the altar, the people worshiping inside. Every inch gets counted. Every person gets accounted for. But then comes the twist. He's told to leave out the courtyard outside the temple. Don't measure it. Don't count it. Because that part isn't protected anymore. That part has been handed over, given to outsiders. And those outsiders are going to trample it for exactly 42 months. Write that number down. 42 months. You're going to need it. So picture this. One city, split in two. Inside the temple walls, it's still holy ground. God knows every worshiper by name. But step outside those walls, and you're in occupied territory, trampled, overrun, for 3.5 years straight. That's the condition of Jerusalem, right before the two witnesses show up. They don't arrive in a quiet, peaceful city. They arrive in a place that's half sacred, half war zone. A city where the inside is protected, and the outside is under siege. And here's the detail most people miss completely. The trampling lasts 42 months. The witnesses preach for exactly 1,260 days. Do the math. That's the same length of time. These two men aren't going to stand in that street for a season. They're not going to deliver a few sermons and leave. They're going to stay for the entire siege. Every single day of it. Not one day less. Which raises a question worth sitting with. Why would anyone volunteer for that? Why would two men choose to stand in the most dangerous, contested piece of land on planet Earth for 3.5 straight years, knowing exactly how it ends? The answer starts with what they're wearing. And it's not what you'd expect. Sackcloth. That's the first thing anyone would notice about these two men. Rough, scratchy cloth. The kind people wore when they were grieving. The kind people wore when someone had died. Or when a whole nation had gone so far off track that all you could do was mourn it. So before either man says a single word, the outfit already tells you something. These aren't hype men. These aren't showmen looking for a crowd. They're grieving over what they're about to say. And what they're about to say is going to take 1,260 days to finish. 3.5 years. Standing in the street. Every single day. While the world around them falls apart in ways you couldn't imagine. Plagues. Disasters. A global takeover unfolding in real time. And through all of it, these two men just keep talking. Keep warning. Keep showing up. Here's the detail that trips people up. The text calls them 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands. That image comes from an old vision, one where oil from olive trees feeds a lamp so it never runs dry. These two men work the same way. One feeds the light, the other is the light. Together, they never run out. But there's something the text doesn't spell out directly, and it's worth pausing on. Nobody actually gets a transcript of what these men say for 1,260 days straight. Not one sentence quoted directly. So how do we know their message? We know it from the outfit. Sackcloth means repentance. That's the message. Turn around. And we know it from the title itself. Witnesses. That word means they're testifying. Not selling something, not performing. Testifying. The way someone testifies in a courtroom. And in a world where a global power is demanding everyone worship a single leader, these two men are standing in the street saying the opposite. There's another king. He's not the one in charge right now. And he's coming. That message alone should be enough to get them killed on day 1. But it doesn't happen on day 1. It doesn't happen on day 1,000 either. For 1,260 straight days, nobody can touch them. Soldiers try. Nothing works. Every single attempt fails. Which means somebody, or something, is protecting them the entire time. And what protects them turns out to be something you've heard of before, coming from two names most people already know. Here's where it gets specific. The text doesn't just say these two men are protected. It tells you exactly how. Anyone who tries to hurt them gets hit with fire, straight out of their mouths, not a metaphor. The text describes actual fire, consuming actual attackers. Now, if that sounds familiar, it should. There's a story about a prophet named Elijah, centuries earlier, who called down fire from the sky. Twice. Soldiers came to arrest him. Fire came down instead. That's not a coincidence. That's a signature, and these two men are carrying it. Second power. They can shut the sky so it doesn't rain. At all. For as long as they're prophesying. Sound familiar again? Elijah did that too. Locked the sky shut over an entire nation for 3.5 years. Same exact length of time these two witnesses are active. That's not a small detail. That's the same number showing up twice on purpose. Third power. They can turn water into blood, strike the earth with plague after plague, whenever they choose. That one belongs to somebody else. Moses turned a river into blood as the first plague against Egypt, then kept striking, plague after plague, each one worse than the last. So here's what you're looking at. Two men, standing in Jerusalem, carrying the exact signature moves of two of the most powerful prophets in the entire Old Testament, Moses and Elijah. Now, before you assume that means these two men literally are Moses and Elijah risen from the dead, hold on. The text never actually names them. It gives you the powers. It doesn't give you the names. And that gap between what's described and what's confirmed has fueled a debate that's been going for centuries. We're coming back to that. For now, here's what matters. These powers make them untouchable, not invincible in general. Untouchable for a specific reason, for a specific length of time. The moment their assignment is finished, so is the protection. Read that again. The protection isn't permanent. It's timed. It runs exactly as long as their testimony needs to run, and not 1 second longer. Which means somewhere out there, a countdown is running. And everybody trying to kill these two men, every soldier, every weapon, every army the world can throw at them, is failing for one specific reason. The clock hasn't hit 0 yet, but clocks run out. Every single one of them. And when this one does, something is going to happen in that street that the entire planet will end up watching. Before we get to what happens next, you need one more piece. The text doesn't just say these men die in a city. It gives that city 3 different names, all at once. First name, Sodom. That's the city God destroyed with fire, way back in Genesis, because of how far gone it had become. Second name, Egypt. That's the nation that enslaved an entire people, the same nation Moses' plagues were sent against. Third detail, and this one removes all doubt. This is the city where Jesus himself was crucified. Put that together. This is Jerusalem, the holy city, the city with the temple, the city with the altar, the city God measured and counted back in section 2, and now it's being called Sodom. It's being called Egypt. The same city that houses God's temple has become, spiritually, everything God's prophets spent their entire lives warning people about. That's not a random detail. That's the whole point. These two witnesses aren't sent to some far-off enemy nation. They're sent to the one place that should already know better. The place with the temple. The place with the history. The place that watched Jesus die and still didn't turn around. That's where God sends his last 2 prophets. Not to strangers. To the place most likely to reject them anyway. And they know it. That's why they're wearing sackcloth before they even open their mouths. They already know how this ends. The city that crucified 1 prophet is about to kill 2 more. But here's the question worth sitting with before we get to the death itself. If these 2 men are truly untouchable for 1,260 days straight, If fire and drought and every plague in the book are protecting them the entire time, what does it actually take to finally stop them? The answer isn't a stronger weapon, it's something much stranger. Here's the line that changes everything. When they shall have finished their testimony. Not when the beast finally figures out a way to beat them. Not when some new weapon gets developed. When they finish. On their own timeline. Not the beast's. For 1,260 days, this global power throws everything it has at these two men. Armies, weapons, every resource available to a regime running the entire planet. And every single attempt fails. Fire stops it. Drought stops it. Something always stops it. Then one day, without warning, it doesn't. The beast, described as coming up out of a bottomless pit, not from any human government or army, finally makes war against them, and wins. Stop and notice what that means. The power to kill these two men was never missing. It was never blocked by lack of ability. It was blocked by timing. The moment their assignment was done, the protection lifted itself. Nobody broke through a defense. The defense simply ended. And here's the detail worth remembering. Out of everything this global power could do with its authority, control money, control armies, control nations, the very first thing it does with its full power is kill two prophets standing in a street. Not generals, not kings. Two men in sackcloth. Ask yourself why. Why would the most powerful entity on the planet spend its very first move on two unarmed men? Because they were never actually afraid of weapons. They were afraid of what these two men were saying. Truth, repeated every single day for 3.5 years, in the one city that mattered most. The moment that voice stops, the beast finally acts. And it doesn't act quietly. It doesn't act privately. What happens to these two men in that street isn't hidden from anyone. It's about to become the most watched event in the history of the planet. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you. The text says, people from every nation, every language, every ethnic group on earth see the bodies of these two men lying in that street. Not the crowd standing nearby, not the residents of Jerusalem. Everyone, every nation on earth, watching the same scene, at roughly the same time. Think about when this was written. Around 1900 years ago, no televisions, no satellites, no internet, no way for information to travel faster than a horse or a ship. For 18 out of the 19 centuries since this was written, that single detail was flatly impossible. There was no mechanism on Earth that could show the same image to the entire planet at once. And now it's Tuesday. A phone in someone's pocket, a live stream, a push notification. The exact thing that sounded impossible for almost 2,000 years is now something that happens by accident, multiple times a day, without anyone thinking twice about it. Sit with that for a second. Something that took nearly 2,000 years to become physically possible is now sitting in your back pocket. That gap between impossible and ordinary didn't close slowly. It closed inside one single lifetime. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. The bodies don't get buried. Not for 3.5 days. In the ancient world, refusing someone burial wasn't just neglect. It was the ultimate insult. A way of saying this person deserved absolutely nothing, not even basic dignity. And the world doesn't just leave them there quietly. The text says, people celebrate. They send each other gifts. They throw parties. Read that again. Two men are dead in the street, and the response from the entire watching world is joy, relief, presents exchanged like it's a holiday. Why would anyone celebrate the death of two unarmed prophets? The text actually answers this directly. It says these two men had been tormenting everyone on earth, not annoying them, not inconveniencing them, tormenting them. Sit with that word for a second. What kind of message causes torment? Usually, it's the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't let you look away. The kind that keeps showing up every single day for 3.5 years, refusing to be ignored. Think about what that actually means for the people living through it. 3.5 years of somebody standing in the street, every single day, telling you that the system you've bought into is wrong, that the leader you've been told to worship isn't who he says he is. Day after day. No breaks. No days off. A message you can't outrun because it's always right there, waiting for you the next morning too. When that voice finally goes silent, it doesn't feel like a loss to the people watching. It feels like relief, like a weight lifting. So they celebrate. For 3.5 days, cameras stay locked on those two bodies. The whole planet keeps checking in, making sure, confirming, again and again, that the voice really is gone. Here's something worth noticing about that 3.5-day window. It's not a vague, unspecified length of time. It's exact. Somebody, somewhere, is counting. And the fact that it's counted this precisely tells you it's not just decoration. It's a countdown to something. This is the moment the entire world believes it has won. Every screen on Earth is pointed at proof that truth finally lost. Gift exchanges happening in real time, filmed and shared, the same way people might celebrate the end of a war or the fall of an enemy leader. But here's the piece nobody watching that street has any way of knowing yet. 3.5 days isn't a random number. It's exactly the same length of time as another very famous 3-day stretch in this same city, one that happened almost 2,000 years earlier and ended nothing like this crowd expects. Think about the confidence in that celebration. Nobody in that crowd is holding back, waiting to see what happens next. They're not nervous. They're not cautious. They're all in. Gifts already sent. Parties already happening. As far as they're concerned, this story is finished. The cameras are still rolling. The celebration hasn't stopped yet. And that's exactly when it happens. Picture the scene exactly as it's happening. Bodies in the street. Cameras locked on them. Still broadcasting to every corner of the planet. Gifts still being exchanged. The celebration hasn't slowed down at all. Then, without warning, everything changes at once. The text says, "The breath of life enters both men." Right there, in front of everyone. And they stand up, on their own feet. Live, on every screen watching. Try to actually picture the reaction. Not applause, not relief. Fear, real fear. The kind that spreads through a crowd instantly, because everyone watching just realized they spent 3.5 days celebrating something they should never have celebrated. Think about what that moment actually feels like from inside the crowd. You sent a gift 2 days ago. You laughed at a party last night. And now the two men you were celebrating the death of are standing back up, live, in front of you and everyone you know. There's no walking that back. There's no deleting the footage. It already went everywhere. Then a voice comes from the sky, loud enough, public enough, that there's no mistaking where it's coming from. It says 2 words, "Come up." And these two men rise. Not carried, not pulled by anything visible. They simply go up, into a cloud, while every single enemy who wanted them dead stands there and watches it happen. The text uses one specific word to describe what the crowd does next. Beheld, not glanced, not looked away nervously. Beheld, they keep watching, every second of it. Now here's the detail worth slowing down for. Almost 2,000 years earlier, in this exact same city, someone else died, came back to life, and rose into the sky. Jesus. Same city, same basic pattern. Death, life again, rising. But there's one massive difference. Nobody actually watched Jesus rise. The tomb was found empty. Over 500 people reportedly saw him alive again afterward. But the actual moment, the instant he came back, the instant he ascended, nobody filmed it. Because there was nothing to film it with. It took faith to believe it happened. That's an important gap. For almost 2,000 years, believing in that resurrection required trusting eyewitness accounts you couldn't personally verify. No footage, no broadcast, just testimony, passed down. These two men don't get that same privacy. Their resurrection happens live, broadcast, undeniable, to the exact same people who were throwing a party over their deaths 3 days earlier. What required faith the first time around gets handed to this generation as raw, unmistakable evidence. Nobody watching that street can say later, I didn't know. Nobody can say, there wasn't proof. The proof stood up on camera and flew into the sky while the feed was still live. And the second it happens, the ground starts shaking. A massive earthquake hits, at the exact same hour as the Ascension. A tenth of the entire city collapses. 7,000 people die in the collapse itself. Think about the timing of that. Not the next day, not the next hour, the same hour. Whatever is causing that earthquake isn't a coincidence lining up nearby. It's connected directly to what just happened in the sky. Now here's where the story takes its strangest turn yet. In almost every other disaster described in this same book, survivors respond the exact same way. Every single time. They curse. They refuse to change. The suffering doesn't soften them. It hardens them. Not this time. This time, something different happens to the people left standing in that broken, shaking city. And it's the one reaction nobody watching that celebration 3 days earlier would have predicted. Here's the reaction that makes this moment unlike anything else in the entire book. The survivors, standing in a city with a tenth of its buildings collapsed, and 7,000 people dead around them, don't curse. They don't harden. They give glory to God. That's rare. Almost every other disaster in this account ends the same discouraging way. People refuse to change, no matter how bad it gets. Plagues hit, and they double down. Disasters hit, and they double down again. This is one of the only moments in the entire book where the opposite happens. So what actually broke through? It wasn't the 1,260 days of preaching by itself. These two men talked every single day for 3.5 years, and the world still threw a party when they died. It wasn't even the earthquake alone. Earthquakes happen throughout this account and rarely change anyone's mind. What broke through was the sequence. Death, watched by everyone. Celebration, watched by everyone. Then resurrection, watched by everyone. Then ascension, watched by everyone. The message that got ignored for 3.5 years finally landed the moment it became undeniable. There's something worth noticing in that pattern. The preaching alone didn't work. The proof is what worked. People can ignore words for years. It's much harder to ignore something you watched happen live, on camera, to two men you personally celebrated killing 3 days earlier. And right after that earthquake, in the very next verses, comes the sound that changes the entire story, a trumpet. The seventh one in a sequence of 7. And what it announces isn't another disaster. It announces a kingdom. The exact wording says, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of God, permanently, forever." Line up the sequence one more time. The witnesses preach for 1,260 days. The beast kills them. The world celebrates for 3.5 days. They rise. They ascend while their enemies watch. The earthquake hits. The survivors give glory instead of cursing. And then, immediately, the trumpet sounds, and the kingdom is announced. These two men aren't a side story inside a bigger event. They're the very last thing that happens before everything changes. Their death is the final murder before judgment falls. Their resurrection is the final proof before the ultimate proof arrives. Every piece of suffering they went through, the sackcloth, the years in a hostile street, the public execution, the unburied bodies, all of it lines up right before the exact moment the kingdom gets announced. Not as background noise, as the final act. Which brings up the one question this entire account never actually answers, no matter how many times you read it. Who exactly are these two men? The strongest theory points to Moses and Elijah. The powers match exactly. The drought, the fire, the blood, the plagues. Both men appeared together with Jesus, on a mountain, centuries after their deaths, in a moment called the Transfiguration. And here's the detail almost nobody brings up. They weren't just standing there. They were talking with Jesus about his death, in Jerusalem, the same city where these two witnesses will die. That's not a small coincidence. That's two men discussing a death in Jerusalem, who then show up at the end of the story, carrying powers that trace straight back to their own lives, dying in that exact same city. Another theory points to Enoch and Elijah instead, since both of them were taken up to heaven without ever actually dying. And there's a verse that says every person owes one death, eventually. Under that theory, this would be the moment they finally pay it, the one death they've been owing since they left the earth without experiencing it the first time. And then there's a third option, one that gets far less attention but has its own logic. Two ordinary, unnamed people. Nobody famous. Nobody with a Bible-era resume. Just two people God chooses, the same way He's chosen unlikely people throughout the entire book. Shepherds, farmers, people nobody expected. Here's the honest answer. The text gives you the powers. It never gives you the names. And that gap has fueled disagreement for centuries, with serious scholars landing on every single side of it. Nobody has settled this. Nobody may ever settle it. Maybe the identity was never the point. Maybe the point was always the message they carried, not the resume behind it. Two witnesses, doing exactly what the law required, because it takes two, not one, to make a testimony legally binding. That detail alone might explain why God sent a pair instead of one man alone. But one detail should stay with you longer than any of the theories. The number of days these men are given matches, almost exactly, a number circulating through global headlines right now. And once you see where that number is showing up today, you won't be able to unsee it. That part's coming next.